Maria Santos had always been good with her hands. Growing up in a small farming town, she learned to fix broken things, tend to injured animals, and care for anyone who needed help. When the military recruiters came through town, they weren't looking for fighters. They needed medics, people who could patch up soldiers and keep them alive when everything went wrong. She signed up not because she wanted to see combat, but because she wanted to help people. The training was tough, but Maria pushed through every challenge. She learned to stop bleeding, treat infections, and work under pressure. Her instructors noticed something special about her. While other trainees panicked during drills, Maria stayed calm and focused. The day she graduated, her mother cried at the ceremony. "Promise me you'll stay safe," her mother whispered, holding her tight. Maria promised, even though they both knew she was heading somewhere dangerous. Her first assignment was Forward Operating Base Phoenix, a remote outpost in hostile territory. The base was small, dusty, and surrounded by mountains that seemed to watch everything they did. The soldiers there had been fighting for months, and it showed on their faces. They were tired, stressed, and far from home. Maria set up her medical station in a converted shipping container. It wasn't much, but she made it work. She hung pictures from home on the metal walls and organized her supplies with military precision. The soldiers started calling her Doc, even though she wasn't a real doctor. She didn't mind. It meant they trusted her. The first few weeks were quiet. Maria treated minor injuries, handed out medicine for headaches, and listened to homesick soldiers talk about their families. She quickly learned everyone's names and stories. There was Jenkins, who had 3 kids back home. Rodriguez, who was saving money to buy his parents a house. Thompson, who carried a lucky penny his girlfriend gave him. The unit commander, Captain Williams, was impressed with her work. "The men like you," he told her during one of their weekly meetings. "You're good for morale. Keep doing what you're doing." Maria nodded and went back to her duties, never imagining that everything was about to change. One morning, intelligence reports came in about enemy movement in the surrounding hills. The base went on high alert. Soldiers checked their weapons and equipment. Maria made sure her medical supplies were ready just in case. She had trained for this moment, but actually facing it felt different. As the sun set over the mountains, Maria looked out at the soldiers preparing for whatever might come. They were young men, most barely out of high school, carrying heavy responsibilities in a dangerous place. She thought about her promise to her mother and wondered if she would be able to keep it. The radio crackled with updates throughout the night. Enemy forces were moving closer. The soldiers took their positions along the base perimeter. Maria stayed in her medical station, waiting and praying that her skills wouldn't be needed, but deep down, she knew that tomorrow would test everything she had learned. She wrote a quick letter to her mother, telling her about the good parts of her assignment. The letter mentioned the beautiful sunsets, the strong friendships she was building, and how much the soldiers appreciated her care. She didn't mention the fear that was growing in her chest or the feeling that something big was coming. As dawn approached, Maria checked her supplies one more time. Bandages, antiseptic, painkillers, surgical tools. Everything was organized and ready. She had no idea that in a few hours she would need every single item in ways she never expected. The quiet morning felt heavy with possibility, and Maria Santos, the unit's caregiver, prepared for whatever the day might bring. The attack came at sunrise when the soldiers were changing shifts. Maria was organizing medical supplies when the first explosion shook the entire base. The sound was deafening, nothing like the training exercises she remembered. This was real, and it was happening right outside her door. "Contact! Contact!" someone screamed over the radio. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Maria grabbed her medical bag and ran toward the door, but Captain Williams appeared and pushed her back inside. "Stay here, Doc. We'll bring the wounded to you," he shouted over the noise. "Don't come out no matter what you hear." Then he was gone, running toward the sound of battle with his rifle ready. Maria had never felt so helpless. Through the small window of her medical station, she could see muzzle flashes and smoke. The radio chatter was chaotic, with soldiers calling out positions and requesting backup. She prepared her workspace, laying out surgical tools and starting IV drips before she even had patients. The first wounded soldier stumbled through her door 20 minutes later. It was Private Martinez, bleeding from his arm and limping badly.
"Shrapnel," he gasped, collapsing onto her examination table.
Maria's training kicked in immediately. She cut away his uniform, cleaned the wounds, and started working. "How bad is it out there?" she asked while stitching up a deep cut on his forearm. Martinez winced but tried to smile. We're holding them off, Doc, but they hit us hard. There's more wounded coming. As if on cue, 2 soldiers carried in Sergeant Baker, who was unconscious with blood streaming from his head. For the next 2 hours, Maria worked without stopping. She treated gunshot wounds, shrapnel injuries, and concussions. Her small medical station became a battlefield hospital. Soldiers helped each other to her door, and she patched them up as quickly as possible so they could return to fighting. The fighting was intense, but Maria noticed something changing. The gunfire was getting closer to her building. Through her window, she could see enemy soldiers moving between the base structures. They were inside the perimeter. Jenkins burst through her door, his face pale with fear. Doc, we need to move you. They've breached the south wall. Captain Williams is setting up a fallback position, but you need to come with us now. Maria looked at the 3 wounded soldiers still on her treatment tables. Martinez was stable but weak. Baker was starting to regain consciousness. Thompson had just been brought in with a serious chest wound that needed immediate attention. I can't leave them, Maria said firmly. Thompson needs surgery right now or he'll die. And Martinez can't walk far enough to reach the fallback position. Jenkins shook his head. Doc, if you stay here, you might not make it out. These guys understand the risks. But Maria had already made her decision. She had trained to save lives, not abandon wounded soldiers when they needed her most. Go, she told Jenkins. Set up the fallback position. I'll stay with my patients and catch up when they're stable enough to move. Jenkins looked like he wanted to argue, but another explosion nearby ended the conversation. Stay low and stay quiet, he said. We'll come back for you as soon as we can. Then he disappeared back into the battle. Maria was now alone with 3 wounded soldiers, enemy forces moving closer, and limited supplies. She continued working on Thompson's chest wound, her hand steady despite the fear growing in her heart. Outside, the gunfire was getting louder and more frequent. She had never imagined this scenario during her training, but she knew what she had to do. These soldiers depended on her, and she wouldn't let them down. Even if it meant putting herself in danger, she would stay and do her job until the very end. The silence was almost worse than the gunfire. For 10 minutes, everything went quiet outside Maria's medical station. She could hear her own breathing and the soft moans of the wounded soldiers. Thompson was stable now, but still unconscious. Martinez was trying to sit up despite his injuries. Baker kept asking for water. Maria was changing Thompson's bandages when she heard footsteps outside. Slow, careful steps that didn't sound like friendly soldiers. She froze, holding her breath. The footsteps stopped right outside her door. Someone's in there, a voice said in a language she didn't recognize. Maria's heart pounded as she realized enemy soldiers had found her medical station. She looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the small space offered no real cover. Martinez had heard the voices too. Despite his injuries, he tried to reach for his sidearm, but Maria gently pushed his hand away. If shooting started in this confined space, everyone would be in danger. The door handle turned slowly. Maria positioned herself between the entrance and her patients, even though she had no idea what she could do to protect them. The door opened, and 3 enemy soldiers stepped inside, weapons raised. The leader, a man with a thick beard and intense eyes, scanned the room quickly. He saw Maria in her medical uniform, the wounded soldiers on the tables, and the surgical equipment scattered around. He said something to his companions, and they lowered their weapons slightly. "You are doctor?" he asked Maria in broken English. His accent was heavy, but she understood him clearly. Maria nodded, not trusting her voice to work properly. She had heard stories about what happened to captured medical personnel, and none of them were good. The bearded man stepped closer and pointed to one of his companions, who was limping and had blood soaking through his pants. "You help him," he said. It wasn't a question. Maria looked at the wounded enemy soldier, then at her own patients. Every part of her training said to help anyone who was hurt, regardless of which side they were on. But these were the same people who had just attacked her base and wounded her friends. "Please," the wounded enemy soldier said in better English. "I have children at home, 2 girls." He showed her a crumpled photograph from his pocket. 2 young girls with bright smiles looked back at her. Martinez tried to protest from his table. "Doc, Don't help them. They just tried to kill us. But Maria was already moving toward her medical supplies. She motioned for the wounded enemy soldier to sit on the floor since all her tables were occupied. The injury was a gunshot wound to his thigh. Serious, but not life-threatening if treated properly. As she cleaned the wound, she could feel the other enemy soldiers watching her every move. Working on someone who had just been fighting her own people felt strange, but Maria's hands stayed steady. Medicine was about helping people, not choosing sides. The wounded soldier winced but didn't cry out as she removed bullet fragments and stitched the wound closed. "Thank you," he said quietly when she finished bandaging his leg. "You are a good doctor." The bearded leader watched everything with curious eyes. When Maria was done, he nodded approvingly. "You help your enemies. This is honorable." For a moment, the small medical station felt different. Instead of a war zone, it seemed like a place where humanity still existed. Enemy soldiers and American wounded shared the same small space, all of them just people who wanted to go home safely. But the moment ended quickly. Radio chatter from outside reminded everyone that the battle was still happening. The bearded soldier said something to his companions and they prepared to leave. "We will not harm you or your wounded," he told Maria before heading toward the door. "You are protected by your healing hands." Then they were gone, disappearing back into the fighting as suddenly as they had appeared. Maria stood in her medical station, shaking from adrenaline and confusion. In the span of 15 minutes, everything she thought she knew about this war had become more complicated. She looked at her American patients, all staring at her with expressions ranging from gratitude to bewilderment. "That was either really brave or really stupid, Doc," Martinez said finally. "But I think you just saved all our lives." The gunfire started again an hour after the enemy soldiers left. This time it sounded different, more organized and coming from a specific direction. Maria realized her own unit was pushing back, trying to retake control of the base. She could hear Captain Williams shouting orders somewhere in the distance. Thompson finally woke up and immediately tried to get off the table. "What's happening, Doc? Where is everyone?" His voice was weak, but his eyes were alert. "Easy," Maria said, gently pushing him back down. "You took shrapnel to the chest. You need to stay still for a while longer." She checked his bandages, relieved to see no fresh bleeding. The radio in her station crackled to life. "Medical, this is Williams. What's your status?" Maria grabbed the radio quickly. "This is medical. I have 3 wounded but stable patients. We're secure for now. Copy that. Stay put. We're clearing the area section by section. ETA to your position is 30 minutes. 30 minutes felt like a lifetime. Maria used the time to check on all her patients and reorganize her supplies. The attack had used up most of her emergency medical equipment. If more wounded came in, she would have to get creative with what was left. Martinez was finally able to sit up without assistance. "Doc, can I ask you something? Why did you help that enemy soldier? I mean, I'm not complaining because it probably saved our lives, but I need to understand." Maria paused while restocking her suture kit. It was a question she had been asking herself since the encounter. "When I became a medic, I took an oath to help anyone who was hurt, regardless of who they were. When I saw that photograph of his daughters, I remembered that we're all people first, soldiers second." Baker nodded from his table. "My wife is a nurse back home. She always says the same thing. Helping people is just what medical folks do." The conversation was interrupted by footsteps outside again, but this time Maria recognized the heavy boots of American soldiers. Captain Williams appeared in the doorway, followed by Jenkins and 2 other soldiers she recognized. "Good to see you alive, Doc," Williams said, his face showing obvious relief. "How are your patients?" "All stable. Thompson needed surgery, but he'll recover. Martinez and Baker can probably move with assistance." She gave him a quick medical report on each soldier's condition. Williams looked around the medical station, noting the extra blood on the floor and the depleted supplies. "We heard there were enemy soldiers in this area. Did you see anything?" Maria hesitated for just a moment. She could tell Williams about the encounter, about helping the wounded enemy soldier, about the unexpected moment of humanity in the middle of a battle, but she could also imagine how that conversation would go. "They came through here," she said carefully, "but they didn't harm anyone. I think they realized this was a medical facility and moved on. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Williams seemed satisfied with the answer. He had bigger concerns than interrogating his medic about every detail of the attack. "We're setting up a secure perimeter now," he told her. "Medical evacuation helicopters will be here in 2 hours to take your wounded to the field hospital." "Can they travel?" Maria nodded. "Thompson will need to be carried on a stretcher, but all 3 should be fine for transport." As Williams and his team prepared to leave, Jenkins pulled Maria aside. "I heard what you did, Doc, staying with the wounded when you could have evacuated. That took real courage." "I just did my job," Maria replied, but Jenkins shook his head. "No, you went beyond your job. These guys will never forget that you stayed with them when it got dangerous. That's the kind of thing that makes the difference between a unit that works together and a unit that falls apart under pressure." After the soldiers left, Maria sat down for the first time in hours. Her hands were finally shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. She thought about the enemy soldiers' daughters in the photograph, about Thompson's chest wound, about the choice she had made to treat everyone who needed help. The attack was over, but Maria knew something had changed in her. She was no longer just the unit's caregiver. She had become someone who made difficult decisions under pressure, someone who chose compassion even when it was complicated. The war had tested her in ways she never expected, and somehow she had passed the test. But she also knew this was just the beginning. There would be more battles, more wounded soldiers, more impossible choices. As she prepared for the medical evacuation, Maria Santos wondered what other challenges lay ahead in this complicated war. 3 weeks after the attack, Forward Operating Base Phoenix had been rebuilt and reinforced. New soldiers arrived to replace those who had been wounded or transferred. Maria's medical station was upgraded with better equipment and more supplies. Command had taken notice of what happened during the attack, and they wanted to make sure their medics had everything they needed. Maria was training the new soldiers in basic first aid when Captain Williams approached with a serious expression. "Doc, I need to talk to you in private." They walked to the command bunker where Williams closed the door and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been reading reports about the attack 3 weeks ago. Some interesting details are coming to light." Maria's stomach tightened. She had been wondering when this conversation would happen. Williams opened the folder and showed her several photographs taken by surveillance drones during the battle. "These images show enemy soldiers near your medical station. The timestamp puts them there for about 15 minutes. But here's what's interesting." He pointed to another photo. "This shows the same soldiers leaving the area, and one of them is clearly limping and has fresh bandages on his leg." Maria looked at the photos without saying anything. Williams continued, "I also found this radio intercept from enemy communications after the attack." He handed her a typed translation. "It's a report to their command about encountering an American medic who provided medical treatment to a wounded enemy soldier." The translation was short but detailed. It described Maria as honorable and recommended that all medical facilities be treated as neutral ground in future operations. It even mentioned her skillful treatment of the gunshot wound. "So," Williams said, leaning back in his chair, "want to tell me what really happened in there?" Maria took a deep breath. They came in armed. "I had 3 wounded American soldiers who couldn't be moved. One of their soldiers was injured and asked for help. I treated his wound. They left without harming anyone." Williams studied her face for a long moment. "You realize you could face disciplinary action for providing aid to enemy combatants?" "Yes, sir. I understand that. You also realize that your decision probably saved the lives of your patients and prevented your medical station from being destroyed?" Maria nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading. Williams closed the folder. "Doc, I've been a soldier for 15 years. I've seen a lot of combat and worked with dozens of medics. What you did was technically against regulations. But it was also brilliant tactical thinking disguised as medical ethics." He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the base. "Since your encounter, we've had 3 separate incidents where enemy forces encountered our wounded and provided basic medical assistance instead of taking prisoners or eliminating them. Intelligence thinks your actions started some kind of unofficial understanding about medical neutrality in this region." Maria was surprised. She had acted on instinct and training, not as part of any tactical plan. Williams turned back to her. "Command is recommending you for a commendation. But more importantly, they're asking if you'd be interested in a special assignment." There's a program developing new protocols for military medical personnel in combat zones. They need someone with real experience and proven judgment under pressure. What would that involve? Maria asked. Training other medics, developing new procedures, maybe even serving as a medical liaison in certain situations. It would mean leaving Forward Operating Base Phoenix, but it would also mean your experience could help save more lives across the entire theater of operations. Maria thought about her patients, her unit, and the relationships she had built over the past months. Leaving felt like abandoning the soldiers who had come to trust her. But she also thought about other medics facing similar situations without guidance or support. Can I have some time to think about it? She asked. Of course. Take a week. But Doc, Williams looked at her seriously. What you did during that attack showed real leadership. You made a split-second decision that had consequences far beyond your medical station. That's the kind of thinking we need in people who train others. That evening, Maria sat outside her medical station watching the sunset over the mountains. Jenkins found her there and sat down beside her. Heard you might be getting a new assignment, he said. The guys are worried about losing their doc. I haven't decided yet, Maria replied. This place feels like home now. These soldiers feel like family, Jenkins nodded. That's exactly why you should take the assignment. You've got something special, Doc. The way you handled that attack, the way you take care of everyone here, the respect you've earned from both sides of this conflict. Other medics need to learn from that. Maria looked around the base at the soldiers preparing for another night on watch. Each one of them had a story, a family back home, dreams for after the war. She had helped keep some of them safe, but there were thousands of other soldiers with other medics who might face similar situations. Besides, Jenkins added with a grin, you can't stay the unit's caregiver forever. Eventually, you've got to become something bigger than that. As the stars came out over Forward Operating Base Phoenix, Maria Santos realized that her one shot at changing the battlefield had already happened. The question now was whether she was ready to take the next shot at changing even more lives. 2 years later, Maria Santos stood in front of a classroom filled with young medics at the Military Medical Training Center in Texas. The students looked eager and nervous, reminding her of herself when she first enlisted. She was about to begin her most important lesson about combat medicine and ethical decision-making. How many of you have heard about the Phoenix Protocol? She asked the class. Several hands went up. The Phoenix Protocol had become standard training for all military medics, establishing guidelines for medical neutrality in combat zones. Maria smiled. Well, I helped write that protocol, and today I'm going to tell you why. She told them about Forward Operating Base Phoenix, about the attack, about the impossible choice between following orders and following her medical oath. She explained how treating one wounded enemy soldier had created an unofficial understanding that saved countless lives on both sides. The Phoenix Protocol exists because sometimes the right medical decision and the right military decision aren't the same thing, she explained. Your job is to be prepared for those moments and to make choices that honor both your training and your humanity. One student raised her hand. What happened to the soldiers you treated during the attack? Thompson made a full recovery and is now a sergeant training new recruits. Martinez opened a small clinic in his hometown after his service ended. Baker became a military instructor. All three of them stayed in touch and visited me when I was developing the training protocols. After class, Maria walked across the base to her office. The walls were covered with letters from medics who had used the Phoenix Protocol in combat, photographs from bases around the world, and commendations from military leadership. But the item she treasured most was a small framed photograph on her desk. It showed Maria with the 3 soldiers she had treated during the attack, taken at Thompson's wedding 6 months earlier. All 4 of them were smiling, healthy, and surrounded by their families. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with the decision to preserve life instead of taking it. Her assistant knocked on the door. Colonel Santos, the new class of instructors is here for their orientation. Maria had been promoted twice since leaving Forward Operating Base Phoenix. Her work developing medical protocols had earned recognition throughout the military. She now oversaw training programs for medics deploying to combat zones around the world. Send them in, she said, straightening her uniform. The new instructors filed into her office, all experienced medics who would be teaching the next generation of military medical personnel. Welcome to the Medical Training Center, Maria began. Each of you is here because you've demonstrated exceptional skill and judgment in combat medical situations. Your job now is to pass that knowledge on to others. She looked at each instructor, seeing something of her younger self in their faces. The most important lesson you can teach is that being a medic means making difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. Sometimes you'll have to choose between what's safe and what's right. Sometimes you'll have to treat people who were trying to kill your friends 5 minutes earlier. Sometimes you'll have to stay when everyone else leaves. One of the instructors spoke up. How do we prepare them for those situations without scaring them? Maria thought about her own fear during that first attack, about the shaking hands and racing heart that came with real combat. You tell them the truth. Combat medicine is scary, dangerous, and complicated, but it's also the most important job in the military. Every life you save matters regardless of which uniform they're wearing. After the orientation, Maria returned to her quarters and called her mother, something she did every Sunday evening. Her mother still worried about her even though Maria now worked in a safe training facility, far from any combat zone. How was your week, Mija? Her mother asked. Good. I started training a new group of instructors, young medics who will be teaching others. The program keeps growing. I'm proud of you, her mother said. When you first enlisted, I was so worried. But you found a way to help people and make a difference. That's all I ever wanted for you. That night, Maria walked around the training base watching young medics practice emergency procedures under simulated combat conditions. They worked with the same intensity and focus she remembered from her own training, preparing for situations they hoped they would never face. She stopped at the memorial wall, where photographs honored medics who had died in combat. Their faces reminded her why her work was so important. Every protocol she developed, every medic she trained, every life saved in the field was a tribute to those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Maria Santos had started as simply the unit's caregiver at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. One shot, one decision to treat a wounded enemy soldier, had changed not just her battlefield but battlefields around the world. The Phoenix Protocol now protected medics and patients in dozens of countries, creating islands of humanity in the middle of warfare. As she walked back to her quarters, Maria reflected on the journey from that dusty outpost to this training facility. She had learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't won with weapons, but with the courage to choose compassion over fear, healing over harm, and humanity over hatred. The shot that changed her battlefield had been fired not from a gun, but from the decision to stay true to her oath as a healer, regardless of the consequences. The young medics she trained would face their own impossible moments, but now they would be prepared, armed with protocols and principles developed from real experience. They would know that being a caregiver in combat meant being ready to make choices that could change everything, one shot at a time.